can make great photography with Gavin Hoey.
Hello, I'm Gavin Hoey and you're watching Adorama TV, brought to you by Adorama, the camera store that has everything for us photographers. And today, well, you can see I'm not actually in my little studio. We're out in the woods because we're going to do a Red Riding Hood themed shoot, but outdoors. Now to do this, of course, I need a model, so let me introduce you to Fern. Say hello, Fern.
Hey.
So Fern's joined me again, very brave, in this lovely warm, it's lovely out here, isn't it? The UK is always lovely and sunny, and we're going to do a little shoot out here. We're going to mix in a bit of flash as well, so it's going to be an extension of our previous studio shoot. So with that in mind, let's get going. So for the first setup, we're going to do something fairly straightforward, a nice kind of head and shoulder shot out here, and I've got some flash gear that I'm going to use, but let's start without flash and just see what we get. Now the lighting today can best be described as flat, but let's take a shot. Now I'm going to use my Canon 70 to 200mm f2.8 lens, a gorgeous lens for portraits and give some lovely creamy blurry backgrounds, especially when you shoot wide open at f2.8. Now I've got to watch my shutter speed here. I've got nothing other than the camera and the lens, no extra lighting, and at 100 ISO my shutter speed is very, very slow, even wide open at f2.8. So let's really bump up that ISO setting and we can go up to 400 ISO, keep my shutter speed up and my pictures sharper. That's great. So they work pretty well, but they are very flat and lack a little bit of drama. And that's where lighting can come in. We can add our own lighting into this scene to create our own rather more dramatic image. So for the lighting, I'm going to use the Rove Light 600. This is a studio powered flash. I mean, it's a very powerful flash, but the best bit about it is it's battery powered. So there's no cables, there's nothing here that's going to cause me to have any problems even shooting in the woods. We just need to get this in the right position. And of course, I need the little remote control to go on top of the camera to trigger the Rove light. Okay, so let's work out what we need to do for it. I'm going to start by taking an ambient meter reading. So I'm in aperture priority mode. I'm in my chosen aperture, f2.8, and I'm going to drop down to ISO 100. That's where I want to be. Now, if I take my ambient meter reading from here, my camera is telling me, wow, it's telling me 1/10 of a second. That's how dark it is down here, and it's the middle of the afternoon. It's crazy dark, but we can work with that. So that's 1/10 of a second. Now I'm actually going to switch to manual, and I'm going to deliberately underexpose the ambient light. So 1/10 of a second, f2.8, ISO 100 is the correct exposure. I'm going to go for 1/30 of a second. So that's a stop and a bit underexposed. Let's just take a shot without the flash firing so you can see how that looks. As you can see, it's a little underexposed, but we still have detail in the background. Now we're going to add in the flash, but we need to work out how bright to make that flash. Remember, my target aperture is f2.8. So let's turn the flash meter on. So all I'm going to do is just pop the meter underneath Fern's chin or thereabouts, and we'll take a meter reading. So at the moment that's telling me f5.6. That's way too bright. I just need to turn this down 2 stops, that's 6 clicks. And then I can take another meter reading, and that's telling me f2.8. So I've hit my target aperture for my flash. My flash is producing f2.8 of light. It's going to balance with the ambient, and hopefully that will just fill in the shadows and give me the shot I'm after. Okay, let's take the shot and find out. Okay, Fern, here we go. So that's lovely. Brilliant. And can you bring your hood up over your head for me? Okay, here we go. Okay, so there we go. We've got some great shots. And that shows you that by balancing the ambient light and the flash, you can get some great shots that give you the best of both, but give you ultimate control over the end result. Okay, so let's try something different. Let's move on, try another location. So we've moved to another location. We've got very different lighting here than inside of the woods, and I'm going to do a very slightly different way of working because the lighting here is bright enough that I might find that my shutter speed goes to my maximum sync speed of this camera, which is 1/200th of a second. So I'm going to jump into TV or shutter priority mode here on my Canon, My sync speed is 200th of a second, but I always work a little below that, so 1/160th of a second. And I'm just going to take a meter reading and let the camera tell me what aperture I can work at. And my camera is telling me f2.8. Now 160th, ISO 100, f2.8 would give me a perfect exposure on the background. I want to slightly underexpose, so I'm going to shoot at f4 instead. Okay, so switch to manual, 1/160th of a second, f4, ISO 100. That's locked in. Now what I need to do is to get the flash to flash at f4, so fern becomes correctly exposed and my background is slightly underexposed. We'll come and take a test reading, pointing the meter reading back at the flash. Okay, I'm actually on f5, so we can just drop that down just a little bit to f4. So my flash is producing exactly the right amount of light, and I should get the shot that I'm after. Beautiful. These are lovely. Really good. Yeah, these are fantastic shots. They really are. Okay, can I get just to a little spin? Okay, let's see how that comes out. Okay, go for it. And yay, there you go. So we've moved around and we're going to do a different shot. Now we're going to do a wide shot. So I've switched out to my 24 to 105mm lens and I've changed the position of the light. We've now got it going much higher in the air to give a very different lighting look. I need to take an ambient meter reading first of all. So I'm going to go for the wide angle end of my lens to try and get a nice ambient feeling. And I'm going to choose, well, we might have to go up a bit on the ISO. Let's have a little go here. ISO 100 at the moment, f4. And that gives me an ambient reading. It's still about 1/10 of a second, so it's not as bad as it looks. So 1/10 of a second is my ambient. I'm going to switch to manual, and if I had 1/10 of a second at f4, well, that would be correctly exposed, and all of this would be correctly and nice and bright. But to make it a little bit more nightimey, I'm going to go from 1/10 of a second to 1/20th of a second. That's one stop. 1/20th of a second to 1/40th of a second. That's two stops. And from 1/40th, well, we're going to go to 1/60th. So that's 2.5 stops underexposed ambient light. So my target aperture is f4. Let's pop the little trigger back on. We need to make sure the flash produces f4 light that hits fern. So let's just get the flash meter and we'll take a meter reading. Here we go. So pop it underneath the chin and it's currently telling me f5.6, so that's a stop of light too much. We can just drop this down one stop, take a meter reading, and I'm getting f4. And in theory, all I have to do is press the button. That's the easy bit. Okay, let's take some shots and find out. Are you ready? Beautiful. That's really good. I'm just going to think about the background when I'm taking these shots. Just try and get a nice shot, a nice background. Really good. So there you go. By combining the ambient light, the flash, changing your lens and changing your position, you can create a whole raft of different pictures. Now all I need to do is to get my favorite picture into Photoshop and do a little bit of processing, and we're going to do that right now.
Hi, I'm Corey Rich, and you are watching Adorama TV. Adorama is the place where I buy all of my equipment for my photography and video needs. Today, in this episode of Getting the Shot, I'm going to talk about why I love backlight. Really, the difference between front light and backlight. In lighting conditions like this, I mean, now it's a fall day in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and the sun is actually pretty low in the sky, but still, between about 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., the sun is pretty high in the sky, and when you shoot front lit, it's pretty harsh. There's kind of shadows under the eyes, it's raccoon-style eyes. Really, it's just a washed-out light. It's pretty darn bright. Now, by simply switching positions and pointing your camera in the opposite direction so that the sun is actually behind your subject, it allows you to create a shadow on your subject's face and have controllable light with a nice rim that separates your subject from the background. The other beauty of shooting backlit is that your exposure is consistent. Once you meter for that shadow, that's it doesn't change. So you can see their eyes, you can see detail on the face, you can see detail on the product or the wardrobe that your subject is wearing. And it allows you to really focus on the creative rather than trying to, for example, add strobe or filling the shot using a reflector to get rid of those unpleasant shadows or make the light pop a little more. But you can see it right now on me. I have this nice rim light on my shoulders and my hair, yet my face and my torso, it's actually consistent light versus high contrast light with shadows. All of the same rules apply when you're shooting with backlight versus front light. It's still about the moment, the composition, and the light, which of course we're shooting backlit. Now, when I'm metering for backlight, I'm actually just metering through the camera, TTL. I'll shoot for the shadow, I'll check the back of the camera, and once I've locked in that exposure, the beauty is, even if the brightness of the sun goes up or down slightly, it barely affects your shadow. So in this case, where there's some milky clouds with pockets of sun, even in manual exposure, while shooting raw, I'm not really concerned about subtle changes in brightness. Whereas when you're shooting front lit, it's critical that you're actually making those subtle adjustments or you're gonna have a problem. You can see in this front lit photograph, there's shadows under the eyes, very high contrast, kind of harsh lines. But then you see in the backlit photograph, it's consistent light. There's shadow across the entire body. I can see the eyes, I can see detail in the face, I can see the product if that's what I'm trying to capture. I can actually see it in this photograph. Again, you combine this backlight with shallow depth of field. In this case, I'm shooting somewhere between f4 and 5.6. Really allows me to separate the background from the foreground, and that rim light helps in doing just that. Additionally, it's a lot easier for the talent, or for the athlete in this case, to not be squinting. When you ask them to stare directly into the sun, it's really hard to keep your eyes open. But when you're actually looking into a shadow, it's much easier. I hope what you take away from this segment is that you can shoot from sun up to sundown and really make that midday light work to your advantage by shooting back.